The doors of the grand chamber burst open with a metallic screech that echoed through the massive hall. Admiral Peter Hayes stumbled forward, his hands bound behind his back with glowing energy restraints that burned against his wrists. Two Xanthari guards, their insect-like bodies covered in gleaming black armor, shoved him toward the center of the circular arena. Peter's uniform was torn in several places, dried blood crusted on his left temple, and a purple bruise spread across his cheek. But his back remained straight and his eyes stayed focused ahead. The grand chamber was unlike anything found on Earth. It stretched upward for what seemed like miles, with rows of elevated seats spiraling toward a ceiling that shimmered with artificial stars. 47 different species sat in those seats, representing the most powerful civilizations in the known galaxy. Some looked almost human, with slight variations in skin color or eye structure. Others were completely alien, creatures of crystalline energy, living gas clouds contained in environmental suits, or beings that existed in dimensions Peter's eyes couldn't quite process. At the highest point of the chamber sat High Chancellor Vex Thor. The Xanthari leader was massive, easily 12 feet tall when standing. His carapace bore silver markings that indicated his rank and age. Multiple eyes, each the size of a human fist, tracked Peter's movement as the human admiral was forced to his knees in the center of the floor. Translucent wings folded against Vex Thor's back, caught the light and created rainbow patterns on the walls. Peter hit the floor hard, the impact sending jolts of pain through his knees. He'd been a prisoner for 3 weeks now, ever since his ship, the ESS Valiant, had been ambushed near the Outer Rim territories. They'd been on a diplomatic mission, carrying peace proposals and trade agreements. Peter had made sure his crew escaped in the lifeboats before the Xanthari boarding parties reached the bridge. He'd stayed behind knowing someone had to buy them time. Now he was here, alone, facing the collective judgment of the Galactic Council. Vex Thor rose from his seat, and the chamber fell silent. His voice, when he spoke, came through universal translators mounted throughout the hall. Each species heard him in their own language, but the contempt in his tone needed no translation. "Behold," Vex Thor announced, gesturing toward Peter with one of his forearms, "a representative of the species that calls itself human. They claim to deserve a place among the civilized races of the galaxy. They demand recognition, trade rights, and territorial sovereignty." He paused, letting his mandibles click together in what Peter had learned was the Xanthari equivalent of a sneer. Yet look at what stands before us. A fragile creature made of soft flesh and brittle bone, a species that has traveled the stars for barely 200 years. Children playing with toys they don't understand. Laughter rippled through the chamber. Not all species laughed, Peter noticed. Some remained silent, watching with expressions he couldn't read, but enough laughed to fill the hall with a sound like breaking glass mixed with grinding metal. Ambassador Solkor, the Krillian representative, oozed forward in his seat. The gelatinous being's body rippled with colors that the translator interpreted as speech. "Perhaps we should classify them as Class 3, suitable only for basic labor. Their system has resources we could use. The third planet, Earth, has remarkable biodiversity that could be harvested." Another voice joined in, this one belonging to Ambassador Kresh, a draconid whose scales reflected light like polished bronze. "I propose annexation. Relocate the population to work colonies. They're clearly not capable of self-governance at the galactic level." More voices added their opinions, each one discussing humanity's future as if Peter wasn't there. As if billions of humans back on Earth and the colonies were just numbers on a balance sheet. The debate grew heated, with some species advocating for complete subjugation, while others suggested humanity be allowed to exist as a client state, serving the Council's interests. Through it all, Peter remained silent. He kept his eyes forward, his face carefully neutral. Inside, rage burned hot enough to melt steel, but he'd been in the military for 50 years. He knew how to control his emotions, how to wait for the right moment. Vex Thor raised a hand and silence fell again. "Before we decide the fate of this species, let us give their representative a chance to speak." He turned his multifaceted gaze on Peter. "Human, you will now beg for mercy. If your words please us, if you grovel sufficiently, the Council might choose to spare your world from immediate subjugation. We might allow your species to exist as servants rather than slaves. Speak." The translator made sure Peter understood every word. The chamber waited, hundreds of alien eyes watching to see how the human would react. This was the moment they expected him to break, to plead, to offer anything and everything to save his people. Peter slowly rose to his feet. His joints creaked, a reminder that he was 72 years old, far past the age when most humans retired from active service. He'd volunteered to lead the diplomatic mission precisely because of his age and experience. He'd survived the colony wars, fought in a dozen battles, and buried more friends than he cared to count. He knew what war really meant, what it cost, and what humans were capable of when pushed to the edge. He looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as he could. Some species looked away, others stared back with curiosity or contempt. Peter took his time, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then slowly a smile spread across his weathered face. It wasn't a friendly smile. It wasn't reassuring or diplomatic. It was the smile of a man who knew a terrible secret, who understood something the council didn't. "You want to hear me beg?" Peter asked, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the silent chamber. "You want humanity to submit?" His smile widened, and several of the closer observers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Chancellor, members of this esteemed council, you've made a critical error in judgment. You think capturing one old man and destroying his ship means you understand us. You think because we're young to the stars, we're weak. You think because we're not part of your ancient civilizations, we don't know how to fight." Vexthor's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of growing irritation. "You dare threaten this council? You stand alone, human. Your ship is debris. Your crew is scattered across space. Your planet has no defenses that could stand against our combined might. One word from me and a fleet of 10,000 ships will reduce Earth to ashes." Peter's smile never wavered. His eyes held something that made even Vexthor pause. Something ancient and dark that transcended species barriers. It was the look of a predator, of something that had survived by learning to fight dirty, to sacrifice everything, to do whatever was necessary to protect its own. "You asked for war," Peter said softly. "We'll give it." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. For a moment, the entire chamber was frozen. Then chaos erupted. Representatives jumped to their feet, shouting for Peter's immediate execution. Others demanded he be tortured until he revealed Earth's military capabilities. Vexthor called for order, his voice booming through the chamber. But a few of the older representatives, those whose species had survived for thousands of years by learning to read threats accurately, felt something they hadn't experienced in centuries. They felt genuine fear, because they recognized that look in Peter's eyes. They'd seen it before in other species other times. It was the look of something that refused to die quietly. Ambassador Thren, the ancient Velosian whose crystalline body contained memories spanning 3 millennia, leaned forward in his seat. He watched Peter Hayes being dragged from the chamber, still smiling that terrible smile, and whispered to himself in a voice like wind chimes, "They've done it again. They've awakened something they don't understand." The chamber doors slammed shut behind Peter, but his words echoed in the minds of everyone present. 4 simple words that would change the galaxy forever. "You asked for war. We'll give it." 2 weeks passed since Peter Hayes spoke his defiant words in the Grand Chamber. The Galactic Council wasted no time in making their decision. If humanity wouldn't submit peacefully, they would be forced to kneel. Orders went out across Council space calling for military forces to assemble. 12 different species contributed ships to the fleet, each one eager to demonstrate their loyalty to the Council, or simply interested in claiming a share of Earth's resources once the humans were conquered. Commander Lisa, Grant stood in the observation deck of Checkpoint Sigma, watching the long-range sensors with growing dread. The defense station orbited at the edge of human-controlled space, serving as the first line of warning against any threats approaching the Sol system. Lisa was 45 years old, with short gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She'd worked her way up from enlisted ranks, spending 20 years in various posts before earning her command position. "Ma'am, you need to see this," Lieutenant Commander Jake Morris said, his voice tight with tension. Jake was young, only 32, but he'd graduated at the top of his class from the Lunar Academy. His specialty was tactical analysis, and right now his face had gone pale. Lisa moved to stand beside him at the main sensor console. The holographic display showed a massive cluster of red dots, each one representing an enemy warship. The computer was still counting, the numbers climbing higher with each passing second. 100 ships? 200. 300, how many? Lisa asked quietly. Final count is 317 capital ships plus support vessels and fighters. We're looking at 12 different species in that fleet. Centauri heavy cruisers, Draconid battleships, Krillian carriers. Jake's fingers flew across the console, pulling up detailed scans. Ma'am, our entire home fleet numbers may be 50 ships. This force could roll right through us. Lisa felt her stomach drop, but her face remained calm. Send priority alert to Earth Command. Full spectrum burst transmission. Then begin evacuation protocols for all civilian stations in the outer system. How long until they reach us? At current speed, 72 hours. But if they push their engines harder, maybe 60. Do we fight or pull back? Asked Lieutenant Sarah Brooks, the station's weapons officer. Lisa looked at the massive fleet on the display. Every strategic instinct she possessed screamed that fighting was suicide. 300 ships against their handful of patrol vessels would be a massacre. But she also knew that someone had to slow them down, give Earth time to prepare. We fight, she said, not to win, just to buy time. Start setting the self-destruct sequence for the station. Once we evacuate, I want Checkpoint Sigma to become the biggest booby trap those aliens have ever seen. On Earth, deep beneath the city of Geneva, President Helen Brooks convened an emergency meeting of the Defense Council. The bunker had been built during the colony wars, designed to survive direct nuclear strikes. Now it served as the command center for humanity's desperate last stand. Helen was 58 with dark hair starting to show streaks of gray. She'd been president for 6 years, elected on a platform of peaceful expansion and diplomatic relations. Now she faced the possibility of watching her entire species enslaved or exterminated. General Paul Dixon stood at the head of the briefing table, his thick frame and scarred hands speaking of a lifetime spent in combat. Madam President, the situation is clear. The Council fleet outnumbers us 6-1, and that's just their first wave. If we try to fight conventionally, we lose. Earth falls within a week. Director Kate Sullivan, head of Strategic Intelligence, pulled up a holographic display showing force comparisons. Our intelligence indicates the Council believes we're primitives. They think we'll surrender once they destroy a few cities. They don't expect real resistance. Then they're in for a surprise, Paul said grimly. He looked at Helen. Ma'am, I'm recommending we activate Protocol Omega. The room fell silent. Everyone present knew what Protocol Omega meant. It was a contingency plan developed during the darkest days of the colony wars, when human factions fought each other with a brutality that shocked even the survivors. Millions died in those conflicts. Entire colonies were wiped out, and humanity learned exactly what it was capable of when survival was at stake. Protocol Omega took those lessons and turned them into a military doctrine designed for one purpose: to make any enemy regret ever threatening Earth. Helen looked at the faces around the table. Admiral Lisa Chen, commander of the home fleet, watched via hologram from her flagship. Dr. Gregory Walsh, humanities expert on alien technology, sat with his hands folded. Kate Sullivan waited with her usual patience. They were all looking at her, waiting for the decision that would define humanity's future. If we activate Omega, Helen said slowly, there's no going back. The galaxy will see what we're really capable of. Some of our own people will hate us for it. Some of our own people are about to be killed by an alien fleet, Paul countered. I understand the moral weight here, ma'am. But we didn't start this war. They came to our home. They threatened our families. Protocol Omega exists for exactly this situation. Helen closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about the 3 billion people living on Earth, the colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter, the mining stations in the asteroid belt, all those lives depending on her decision. She thought about Peter Hayes alone in an alien prison, knowing this moment would come. What about the Ghost Fleet? She asked, looking at Admiral Chen's hologram. Lisa Chen's expression was hard. All vessels are operational. Crews have been in cryo-sleep for 6 years. The moment you give authorization, they wake up ready for combat. 4,000 ships, ma'am. Every single one designed for Protocol Omega tactics. Helen took a deep breath. Activate Protocol Omega. Wake the Ghost Fleet. And may whatever gods exist have mercy on our enemies because we won't. The orders went out in encrypted burst transmissions, traveling at light speed to hidden facilities throughout the solar system. In asteroid shipyards that officially didn't exist, Automated systems began warming up cryopods. In camouflaged orbital platforms around Jupiter and Saturn, lights flickered on after years of darkness. On the far side of the moon, massive hangar doors started opening, revealing ships that had been hidden since their construction. The Ghost Fleet was humanity's secret weapon, a force created during the colony wars and kept in reserve for a worst-case scenario. Each ship was relatively small, mostly frigates and destroyers, but they were designed for a specific purpose. They were kinetic weapons, vessels meant to accelerate to tremendous speeds and ram into enemy targets. Their crews were volunteers, men and women who understood they might not survive their missions. Some ships had minimal crews of 3 or 4 people. Others had full complements ready to evacuate in armored escape pods at the last moment. Captain Nina Torres was among the first to wake from cryo-sleep. She gasped as the pod opened, cold air hitting her lungs. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was or why she was there. Then memory returned. She was aboard the ESS Hammer, one of the Ghost Fleet vessels hidden in Jupiter's atmosphere. She'd volunteered for this 6 years ago, knowing that if she ever woke up it meant Earth was in danger. Nina was 33 years old, with 2 children living in the Martian colonies. Before entering cryosleep, she'd recorded farewell messages for them just in case. Now she pulled herself out of the pod and headed for the bridge, her training taking over. Around her, other crew members were waking up. Nobody spoke much. They all knew what came next. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council fleet crossed into human territory without any resistance. Admiral Kresh, commanding from his flagship Eternal Flame, felt satisfied. The humans weren't even trying to defend their borders. Perhaps they'd already realized the futility of resistance. Broadcast surrender demand, Kresh ordered. Standard terms. They have 12 hours to respond before we begin bombardment operations. The message went out across all frequencies. Kresh expected either silence or a desperate plea for mercy. What he got instead was a response from Commander Lisa Grant, transmitted from Checkpoint Sigma just before the station evacuated. Her image appeared on his view screen, her face calm but her eyes burning with defiance. "This is Commander Lisa Grant of Earth Defense. I've received your surrender demand. My response is simple, come and take it." The transmission ended. Kresh felt a moment of confusion. The human female seemed almost eager for battle. Perhaps she was insane, unable to comprehend the massive force bearing down on her world, or perhaps humans simply didn't understand mathematics. "All ships advance at full speed," Kresh ordered. "If they want to fight, we'll give them the privilege of dying first." The Council fleet moved forward, passing Neptune's orbit without incident. Then Uranus. Still no sign of human forces. Checkpoint Sigma appeared on sensors, a large orbital platform bristling with weapons. But as they approached, the station suddenly exploded in a massive nuclear detonation. The blast created a debris field that would be hazardous to navigation, but nothing more. "Cowards," Kresh muttered. "They destroy their own infrastructure rather than defend it." His tactical officer, a young draconid named Vera, looked uncertain. "Admiral, something feels wrong. Where are their defenders? Even a primitive species should mount some resistance," Kresh dismissed her concerns. "They're hiding." Hopi the Ghost Fleet emerged from Jupiter's crushing atmosphere like demons rising from hell. 4,000 ships, each one a weapon designed for a single purpose, spread across space in a formation that made Admiral Kresh's tactical display look like it was bleeding. His fleet of 300 ships suddenly seemed very small. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morris watched the battle unfold from his new post aboard the ESS Defiant, one of Earth's few traditional warships. He'd been evacuated from Checkpoint Sigma and reassigned to the command vessel just hours before the Council fleet arrived. Now he stood at the tactical station, coordinating the Ghost Fleet's attack with cold precision. "All vessels reporting combat ready," he announced. "Initiating attack pattern Omega-7. Admiral Kresh stared at his displays in disbelief. "What are they doing? Those ships have minimal energy signatures. No heavy weapons, no missile batteries. Are they trying to intimidate us with numbers?" His tactical officer Vera worked frantically at her console. "Admiral, I'm reading massive acceleration from multiple vessels. They're not slowing down. They're not maneuvering into firing positions. They're just coming straight at us." Understanding dawned too late. "Shields to maximum. All weapons free. Shoot them down!" The first impact occurred 12 seconds later. ESS Hammer, with Captain Nina Torres at the helm, struck a Zenthari cruiser amidships at .7 light speed. The kinetic energy released was equivalent to a small nuclear weapon. The cruiser's shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and absorb explosive impacts, did absolutely nothing against solid mass traveling at relativistic velocity. The ship folded in on itself like paper, its hull crumpling, its reactor breaching in a flash of white light. 1,500 Zenthari crew members died instantly, their bodies vaporized before they could even understand what happened. Nina had evacuated 3 seconds before impact, her escape pod jettisoning from the hammer's stern and using the ship's bulk as a shield against the explosion. The pod's G-forces crushed her against her seat hard enough to crack 2 ribs, but she was alive. Around her, dozens of other ghost ships were making their final approaches. But not all crews evacuated. Some stayed with their ships, guiding them in with human hands until the very last moment. Lieutenant Commander Barry Hughes kept his hand on the controls of ESS Thunder until his ship punched through a Draconid battleship's bridge. His last transmission was a single word. Remember. The Council fleet tried to respond. Energy weapons flashed through space, attempting to shoot down the incoming vessels. They destroyed some, but the ghost ships were small and fast. Missiles streaked out, targeting the approaching craft, but even when they hit, the resulting explosions just sent shrapnel hurtling forward at deadly velocities. It was like trying to stop bullets by shooting them with more bullets. Admiral Kresh watched in horror as his fleet died around him. These weren't tactics. This wasn't warfare as the Galactic Council understood it. This was calculated suicide on a massive scale, and it was devastatingly effective. Within 20 minutes, he'd lost over 100 ships. His crew was panicking, shouting orders at each other, trying to find some response to an attack that defied all logic. General Paul Dixon watched the battle from Earth's defense headquarters, his face grim. Beside him, President Helen Brooks stood with her arms crossed, watching the tactical display as red icons winked out one by one. Each icon represented hundreds or thousands of alien lives ending in violence. She felt sick but forced herself to watch. If she ordered these deaths, the least she could do was witness them. "How many have we lost?" she asked quietly. 217 confirmed deaths so far, Paul reported. Another 43 injured in escape pod recoveries. "But ma'am, we're winning. The Council fleet is breaking apart." On his view screen, Admiral Kresh's face appeared. The Draconid looked shaken, his bronze scales dulled by stress. "I'm calling for retreat. All ships fall back to Saturn orbit. Reform defensive positions." But the Ghost fleet pursued relentlessly. They'd been designed for exactly this, to chase fleeing enemies and ensure maximum destruction. Some Ghost ships held back, their ammunition spent, their suicide runs complete. Others pressed forward, hunting the survivors. Back on Zenthar Prime, Chancellor Vex Thor received the transmission from Admiral Kresh. The recording showed the battle from the Council fleet's perspective. Images of human ships ramming into their vessels without hesitation. Scenes of massive explosions and debris fields spreading across space. "We need reinforcements," Kresh's voice said, strain evident even through the translator. "The humans fight like demons. They have no regard for their own lives. They turn themselves into weapons. This is not warfare, Chancellor. This is mass suicide weaponized. We cannot win against an enemy willing to die without hesitation." Vex Thor turned off the recording and looked at Admiral Peter Hayes. The human prisoner had been brought to the Chancellor's private chambers to watch the transmission. Peter's face showed no emotion, but his eyes held that same terrible knowledge they'd shown in the Grand Chamber. "You knew," Vex Thor accused. "You knew what your people would do." Peter nodded slowly. "I knew what we're capable of when you threaten our home." Every person in those ships volunteered. They understood the risks. Some of them have children, families waiting for them back on Earth or Mars. They went anyway because they believe in something bigger than themselves. "It's monstrous," Vex Thor said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Peter asked. "You brought 300 ships to destroy my world. You plan to kill billions. We're using hundreds to stop thousands. Which one of us is the monster?" Before Vex Thor could answer, another figure entered the chamber. Ambassador Thren, the ancient Velosian, moved with the slow grace of someone who'd seen civilizations rise and fall. His crystalline body chimed softly as he approached. "Chancellor, I must speak," Thren said. His voice was like wind chimes, musical and haunting. "I have reviewed the historical records of my people. We have encountered 62 species who fight as these humans do, species who weaponize their own mortality, species who refuse to surrender even when defeat seems certain. What happened to them? Vexthor asked. They survived. Every single one, because they possess something that cannot be defeated by superior numbers or technology. They possessed absolute conviction. Thren turned to Peter. Your people are not unique in the galaxy, Admiral Hayes. You are simply the latest iteration of something ancient. You are survivors. Vexthor's mandibles clicked in agitation. We can still win this war. We have 10,000 more ships in reserve. We can call reinforcements from a dozen sectors. And how many will die? Thren asked. 10,000? 20,000? The humans have shown they will match you death for death. They will turn every ship, every station, every rock in space into a weapon. Can your people sustain that kind of warfare? Can mine? Can any of us? On Earth, President Helen Brooks faced her own reckoning. Senator George Carter had forced his way into the command center, his face red with anger. Madam President, what we're doing is barbaric. We're sacrificing our own people like pawns on a chessboard. They volunteered, Helen said coldly. Every single person in the Ghost Fleet knew exactly what they were signing up for. That doesn't make it right. We're no better than terrorists using suicide tactics. We're protecting our species from extinction. Helen's voice rose. Those aliens came here to enslave or kill us. Every person who died today died to save 3 billion people on Earth. Don't you dare call them terrorists. They're heroes. George fell silent, but his expression showed he wasn't convinced. Helen knew this debate would continue long after the war ended, assuming they survived. History would judge her for these decisions, and she wasn't sure how that judgment would turn out. In space, the battle finally ended. The Council fleet had retreated to Saturn's orbit, having lost 137 ships. The Ghost Fleet pulled back, its numbers reduced to less than 3,000. Rescue operations began immediately, with human ships searching the debris field for escape pods and survivors. Captain Nina Torres was recovered 6 hours after her impact. The rescue team found her pod drifting near Jupiter's moon Europa, its occupant unconscious from pain and stress. They rushed her to the medical bay of the ESS Defiant, where doctors worked to stabilize her broken ribs and treat her internal bruising. When she finally woke up, the first thing she asked was whether they'd won. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morris visited her in medical. We won, he confirmed. They retreated. But ma'am, you're being recommended for the Medal of Valor. What you did out there... Nina shook her head weakly. I just did my job. Did we lose anyone? 217 confirmed dead. They knew the risks. Tears leaked from Nina's eyes, not from physical pain, but from the weight of those deaths. Tell their families they died protecting Earth. Tell them it mattered. Admiral Kresh, regrouping his fleet near Saturn, sent an emergency transmission to the Galactic Council. His message was simple and terrifying. We cannot defeat them. Not like this. Either send overwhelming force to obliterate them completely, or negotiate peace. These humans will not surrender, and they will drag us down with them if we continue. Chancellor Vex. 3 days after the Battle of Jupiter, the Galactic Council chamber was filled with shouting voices and heated arguments. Representatives from 47 species watched footage of the battle over and over, trying to understand what they'd witnessed. Some called for immediate military escalation. Others urged caution. A few even suggested negotiation, though they were quickly shouted down. Chancellor Vexthor stood at the center of the chaos, feeling control of the situation slipping through his claws. The council had existed for 3,000 years, maintaining order through a combination of military might and diplomatic pressure. But they'd never faced an opponent like humanity before, a species that treated death as just another tactical option. Admiral Peter Hayes was brought before the council again, this time in even heavier restraints. Energy fields surrounded him. Weapons were trained on him from multiple angles, and his guards had tripled in number. The council wasn't taking any chances with the human who'd smiled when threatened with war. But Peter's smile was gone now. His face showed only sadness and exhaustion. He looked older than his 72 years, worn down by weeks of captivity and the weight of knowing what his people were doing in his name. Vexthor confronted him immediately. You knew what your people would do. Those tactics are monstrous. You turn your own soldiers into weapons. Peter met his eyes steadily. They volunteered. Every single one. And yes, we mourn every loss. But you came to our home threatening extinction. What did you expect? That we'd line up politely for slaughter? There are rules of warfare, Vexthor insisted. Standards of civilized conflict. Those are rules created by species who could afford to be civilized, Peter replied. You attacked us when we had no chance of winning a fair fight. So we changed the rules. We made ourselves too expensive to conquer. Before Vexthor could respond, Ambassador Thren stepped forward. The ancient Velosian's crystalline body caught the light, creating rainbow patterns on the floor. Chancellor, may I speak? Vexthor gestured permission, grateful for any interruption that might calm the chaos. I have consulted the historical archives of my people, Thren said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. 62 times in recorded history, the Council has encountered species who fight as these humans do. Species who weaponize their own mortality and refuse to surrender. Do you know what became of those conflicts? The chamber fell silent. Thren had everyone's attention now. 12 of those conflicts ended with the extinction of the attacking force, not the defenders. Another 37 ended in negotiated peace after catastrophic losses on both sides. Only 13 resulted in the subjugation of the defending species, and in each case, it required resources that nearly bankrupted the attacking civilizations. Thren turned to Peter. Your people are not unique, Admiral Hayes. You are simply the latest iteration of something we've seen before. You are survivors. This changes nothing, interrupted Ambassador Kresh, the Draconid who'd lost his command after the battle. We have more ships. We can call reinforcements from every sector. We can bring 10,000 vessels to bear. The humans cannot stand against such force. And how many will die? Thren asked quietly. How many of our people are you willing to sacrifice to conquer one primitive world? Back in human space, President Helen Brooks faced similar questions. The victory at Jupiter had bought them time, but intelligence reports showed the Council mobilizing reinforcements. Director Kate Sullivan stood in the command center, presenting data that made everyone uncomfortable. Madam President, we're detecting unusual activity in the Andromeda Relay Network. The Council is calling in ships from across the galaxy. Current estimates suggest they could assemble a fleet of 10,000 vessels within 2 months. General Paul Dixon studied the holographic display, showing projected enemy movements. Then we implement Phase 2 of Protocol Omega. Helen looked at him sharply. Paul, Phase 2 requires resources we've been stockpiling for colony expansion. Metals, rare earths, manufacturing capacity. If we use them for war, we set back our development by decades. If we don't use them, we won't have any colonies to develop, Paul countered. His voice was harder than Helen had ever heard it. Ma'am, every hour we delay gives the Council time to organize. Phase 2 is designed to prevent them from ever reaching Earth in force. We hit them first, hit them hard, and make them think twice about continuing this war. Helen felt the weight of another impossible decision settling on her shoulders. Phase 2 of Protocol Omega was even more aggressive than the Ghost Fleet tactics. It called for strikes deep into Council territory, targeting not military installations but infrastructure. Shipyards, supply depots, communication relays. The goal was to cripple the Council's ability to wage war, but it would also kill countless civilians caught in the crossfire. Authorization code required, the computer announced, waiting for Helen's biometric signature. She thought about the 217 humans who died at Jupiter. She thought about the 3 billion people on Earth who trusted her to keep them safe. She thought about Peter Hayes, alone in an alien prison, who'd known this moment would come. Authorize Phase 2, she said quietly. May God forgive us. Across human territory, massive industrial operations kicked into high gear. Asteroid mining stations abandoned their civilian quotas and began processing raw materials at emergency rates. Shipyards that normally produce cargo vessels and colony transports retooled their assembly lines for military production. And in classified facilities hidden throughout the solar system, construction crews worked around the clock on something new. Commander Lisa Grant, recently promoted to Admiral after her actions at Checkpoint Sigma, received her orders directly from General Dixon. Lisa, I need you to take a strike force into Council space. Your mission is threefold. Gather intelligence, identify high-value targets, and psychological warfare. Lisa studied her new command from the bridge of ESS Defiant. 50 ships, a mix of frigates and destroyers, all equipped with the latest stealth technology. Psychological warfare, sir? Make them afraid, Paul said bluntly. The Council thinks we're primitives. Show them we can reach into their territory whenever we want. Make them worry about their families, their homes. Make them understand that continuing this war will cost them personally. It was dirty work, but Lisa understood the logic. Modern warfare wasn't just about destroying enemy forces. It was about breaking enemy will. If they could make the Council's civilian population demand peace, they might avoid a prolonged conflict that humanity couldn't win. Her strike force departed Earth orbit 3 hours later, jumping to faster-than-light speed and heading toward Council territory. Their first target was a major relay station near the Zenthari homeworld, a facility that coordinated communications across an entire sector. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morris, now serving as Lisa's tactical officer, coordinated the approach. "Admiral, we're coming out of FTL in 30 seconds. Stealth systems at maximum. If the calculations are correct, we'll be invisible to their sensors for at least 10 minutes. They emerged from faster-than-light travel in the shadow of a gas giant, using its radiation to mask their energy signatures. The relay station hung in space ahead of them, a massive structure bristling with communication arrays. Jake scanned the area. Minimal defenses. 3 patrol ships, probably outdated models. No sign they've detected us. "Weapons free," Lisa ordered. "Target the station's main reactor and communication arrays. We're not here to kill people, just infrastructure." Her ships opened fire with precision strikes. Missiles streaked through space, impacting the relay station's critical systems. Explosions blossomed across the structure as power systems overloaded and communication arrays shattered. The patrol ship scrambled to respond, but by the time they oriented toward the human vessels, Lisa's strike force had already jumped back to FTL, disappearing as quickly as they'd appeared. Behind them, the relay station died slowly, its crew evacuating in lifeboats while emergency systems struggled to contain the damage. Thousands of communication channels across the sector went dark, disrupting coordination for dozens of Council operations. But Lisa's ships didn't leave empty-handed. Before jumping away, they deployed marker buoys throughout the area. Each buoy broadcast a recorded message on repeat, visible to any ship with standard sensors. The message was simple. "This is Admiral Lisa Grant of Earth Defense. We know where you live. We know where your families are. We know where your leaders hide. Every world you value, we have targeted. You started this war by threatening our home. Remember that, it was mostly a bluff. Humanity didn't have the resources to actually attack Council homeworlds, and they wouldn't target civilians even if they could. But the Council didn't know that, and uncertainty was a powerful weapon." Over the next week, Lisa's strike force hit 7 more targets across Council space. A supply depot near Krillian territory, a shipyard constructing military vessels, a training facility for Draconid pilots. Each strike was quick, precise, and followed by those same ominous marker buoys. The psychological impact exceeded their expectations. Civilian populations across Council worlds began demanding increased protection. Military resources had to be diverted from offensive operations to defensive positions. Politicians faced angry constituents who wanted to know why the Council strike force dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's moon, exactly 72 hours after Admiral Zara Ventor received her orders. 500 ships, the fastest vessels from a dozen different species, hung in space like a cloud of metal locusts. Zara stood on the bridge of her flagship, staring at the blue planet that had caused so much trouble for the Galactic Council. Earth looked peaceful from orbit. White clouds swirled over blue oceans. Green and brown continents showed where billions of humans lived their lives, unaware that death hung above them. Zara felt a moment of satisfaction. According to her intelligence reports, most of Earth's fleet was still scattered across the outer system. The planet's orbital defenses appeared minimal. This would be over quickly. "All ships attack formation," Zara ordered, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd never lost a battle. "Primary targets are government facilities, power generation, and communications infrastructure. We're not here to commit genocide, just to break their will to fight. Commence bombardment on my mark." 500 ships moved into position, spreading out across high Earth orbit. Energy weapons began charging, preparing to rain destruction on the cities below. The plan was simple. Destroy enough infrastructure to cripple human civilization, force their surrender, and end this war before it consumed more Council resources. Then Earth fought back. The first indication something was wrong came when Zara's tactical officer shouted a warning. "Admiral, detecting massive energy spikes from the surface. Multiple locations, dozens of signatures." Before Zara could respond, The planet's surface lit up like a star. Hidden weapons platforms, disguised as mountains, mining operations, and research facilities, revealed their true nature. Massive electromagnetic railguns, each one the size of a skyscraper, launched solid projectiles from Earth's surface at velocities that made conventional weapons look like toys. Tungsten rods, each weighing several tons, screamed upward through the atmosphere. They punched through Council ships' shields as if they didn't exist, tearing through hull plating and internal systems with catastrophic results. Ships exploded. Reactors breached. Crew compartments decompressed into vacuum. Within seconds, Zara's perfect attack formation had become a chaotic mess of dying vessels and panicked commanders. Captain Nina Torres, recovered from her injuries at Jupiter, and now commanding the orbital defense station Liberty Prime, coordinated the surface batteries with cold precision. She'd studied the enemy fleet's approach vectors and predicted their deployment patterns. Now she was making them pay for their predictability. Target clusters, not individual ships, she ordered her weapons teams. Force them closer together. Make every shot count. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morris, operating from the command center beneath Geneva, fed targeting data to the surface weapons. His calculations were perfect, accounting for atmospheric distortion, planetary rotation, and enemy movement patterns. Each salvo destroyed multiple targets, turning the space around Earth into a graveyard of broken ships. Admiral Zara realized her mistake within 20 minutes. This wasn't a lightly defended planet. This was a fortress that had hidden its weapons until the enemy was too close to escape easily. She'd walked her fleet into a trap. All ships retreat to higher orbit, she ordered. Reform defensive positions. But humanity had prepared for that response too. The minimal orbital defenses suddenly weren't so minimal. Stealth satellites disguised as civilian communications platforms and space junk activated their weapon systems. Mines that had been drifting in orbit for years suddenly accelerated toward Council ships, their guidance systems painting targets across the enemy fleet. Hidden fighter bays on orbital stations opened, launching waves of small craft that swarmed the larger vessels. Admiral Lisa Grant arrived with her strike force, having rushed back from Council space. Her 50 ships were outnumbered 10-1, but they attacked with the ferocity of defenders protecting their home. Her vessels targeted the Council ships trying to escape, cutting off their retreat and forcing them back into the killing zone where Earth's surface weapons could reach them. On Zenthar Prime, Admiral Peter Hayes watched a live feed of the battle that was being broadcast throughout Council space. His guards had left the viewing screen active, perhaps hoping to demoralize him by showing Earth's destruction. Instead, they watched in horror as the Council fleet died around the blue planet. Peter's expression remained neutral, but inside he felt a mix of pride and sorrow. Pride in his people's ingenuity and determination, sorrow for all the lives being lost, both human and alien. This was what war really looked like, stripped of glory and reduced to its basic truth. Organized murder on a massive scale. You planned this, one of his guards whispered, mandibles clicking nervously. All of it. Even getting captured was part of the plan. Peter shook his head. I didn't plan anything, but I knew my people. I knew what we'd do if backed into a corner. You don't survive as long as humans have without learning to fight dirty when necessary. Back at Earth, the battle reached its climax. The Council strike force, which had started with 500 ships, was down to less than 200. The survivors were trying desperately to escape, but every route they took seemed to lead into more weapons fire. Some ships managed to break free and jump to faster-than-light travel, fleeing back to Council space. Others weren't so lucky. Admiral Zara's flagship took a direct hit from a surface railgun. The tungsten rod punched through her bridge and she died without even knowing what killed her. Her second-in-command took over, ordering a general retreat. The Council fleet scattered, abandoning formation and running for their lives. In the command center beneath Geneva, President Helen Brooks watched the casualty reports come in. Despite their preparations, despite every defense they'd built, the brief bombardment before they repelled the attackers had killed civilians. The preliminary estimate was 3 million dead, most of them in coastal cities that the Council had targeted first. Helen's hands shook as she reviewed the numbers. 3 million people, 3 million lives that had depended on her to keep them safe. She'd failed them, even in victory. General Paul Dixon stood beside her, his face grim. Ma'am, we won. We stopped them. At what cost? Helen asked quietly. 3 million dead, Paul. 3 million families destroyed, and 3 billion saved, he replied. Ma'am, war doesn't offer good choices, only less terrible ones. You made the right call. Helen didn't feel like she'd made the right call. She felt like she'd made the only call available, which was different. But there was no time for self-recrimination. The war wasn't over yet. Send the message, she told Director Kate Sullivan. All of it. Let the council see what they're really facing. A transmission went out to every council world simultaneously. It was a compilation of footage from the battle, showing Earth's defenses tearing apart the strike force. But then it showed something else. Images of massive ships being constructed in hidden shipyards throughout the solar system. Vessels unlike anything the council had seen before, each one bristling with weapons that combined human innovation with alien technology, captured or traded over the years. General Dixon's voice accompanied the images, speaking in a tone that allowed no doubt about humanity's intentions. This is General Paul Dixon of Earth Defense Command. You attacked our home. You killed our people. What you see here is our response. We call these vessels world breakers. Each one carries enough firepower to reduce a planet's surface to lifeless rock. We have finished construction on 100 of these ships, with more in production. They are now departing for your territories. If this war continues, we will show you what total war really means. It was mostly a bluff. The world breaker ships were real, but they didn't actually carry planet-killing weapons. Humanity didn't have the technology or resources for that level of destruction, and wouldn't use it even if they did. But the Council didn't know that. The psychological impact was exactly what humanity needed. On Zenthar Prime, Chancellor Vexthor received reports of mass panic spreading across Council territories. The footage from Earth's defense had been broadcast on civilian networks, showing the Council's mighty fleet being destroyed by a species they'd dismissed as primitives. Now images of world-breaker ships moving toward their home sent entire populations into hysteria. Member species began withdrawing from the war. First, it was the smaller civilizations, those who'd never wanted to fight in the first place. Then larger powers started pulling back, citing defensive concerns in their own territories. The unified council was fracturing, fragmenting into individual species, all suddenly concerned about their own survival. Ambassador Thren requested an emergency meeting with Vexthor. The ancient Velocian found the Chancellor in his private chambers, staring at casualty reports that seemed to grow longer by the hour. End this, Thren said simply. Every hour you continue this war, the Council grows weaker. The humans have demonstrated they will sacrifice anything to survive. They have the will and capability to inflict terrible losses. Negotiate now, while you still have some leverage. Vexthor's pride wanted to refuse, to call for more reinforcements and continue the fight until